Hello, everybody. I'm Howie Hawkins. I was the Green Party candidate and the Socialist Party candidate for president in 2020. And this podcast, Green Socialist Notes, is about continuing to advocate and advance the eco-socialist program that Angela Walker and I ran on. And I'm a little dark today because the circular light isn't working. I don't know why. Maybe it's because it's so cold. I don't know. But let me just start off today with a few remarks about uh, what's going to happen with this new Republican majority House. Basically, any progressive legislation is not going to go through, and any progressive moves are going to have to be made by executive order. And there are plenty that Biden could do, but he should have done them by now, like declaring a climate emergency. Um, so that's one thing. But what gives the House Republicans leverage is this debt limit coming up. Yesterday, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen announced that next Thursday, the U.S. will hit its debt limit. And that's a cap the federal government is authorized to borrow by selling Treasury securities in order to pay for the spending that Congress has already authorized. So it's not, the debt limit isn't a way to control spending we've already done, uh, although the Republicans act like it is. And raising the debt limit doesn't authorize any new spending. It simply allows the government to finance the obligations it has already undertaken through spending authorized by Congress. So it's not new spending. It's about paying for the goods and services that the federal government has already agreed to buy. Now, if the U.S. were to default on its obligations, it would be unable to borrow money to pay its bills, including what it owns to the bondholders who own U.S. Treasury debt. And even before we get to that point, the closer we get to default, interest rates will go up for businesses and consumers, home buyers, and stock markets and consumer confidence will drop, will fall, will really crash. And that's what we saw the last time the Republicans really played hardball brinkmanships with the debt ceiling in 2011. Now, if the U.S. were to default, it would be an economic catastrophe. Interest rates for future government borrowing would skyrocket. It would shut down basic government services. Federal workers wouldn't be paid. The healthcare system would pretty much collapse because even the private sector is enormously dependent on public subsidies. It would create a financial crisis that would make 2008 look mild by comparison. The collapse of the U.S. Treasuries market, which is a safe haven for money from around the world, would probably end the dollar's status as the world's foremost reserve currency, which will hobble the U.S. ability to continue running trade deficits, which haven't been a problem because we've been able to create the money to cover that. But what it means is American businesses and consumers won't be able to buy nearly as much of the cheap stuff we've been importing from abroad, which would also hurt the economy. It would be a sudden withdrawal because of all the money the government pays through Social Security and federal employee wages and salaries. It would draw immediately about 10% out of the U.S. economy at home, and it would affect expenditures people make importing stuff from abroad, and would precipitate a deep depression globally at a time when the U.S. economy or the world global economy is already headed to a recession, according to the projections of the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, the big banks, and so forth. Now, for a while, the Treasury can undertake what they call extraordinary measures to keep paying the bills after next Thursday, like not putting scheduled deposits in federal and postal employee health and pension funds, which is a problem. But by June, they don't see any way to keep paying bills by these extraordinary measures. So what the Republicans are doing is using this potential crisis as leverage raising the debt limit. In order to do that, they want some things they want. What they want to do is cut Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. They want to cut aid to Ukraine. They want to cut a lot of social programs. So that's what's going to be the drama here, and it may be extended. The crazies on the Republican side, they don't really care if the U.S. economy crashes. They'll blame it on the Democrats anyway. Now, the Democrats should have dealt with this before the last session of Congress closed. They had majorities in both houses, but they didn't get it done. So, what should we be advocating? Well, we should, and actually the Democratic Biden administration is advocating this to abolish the debt limit, but they don't have the votes in the House to do that. The debt limit is artificial, but it blocks federal government from spending money that Congress has already authorized because they can't raise the money through when they're in deficit through Treasury securities. And what the debt limit does is it gives right-wing crazies in Congress the leverage to extort unpopular policy changes like cutting Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Now, another idea that's been floated both back when this crisis hit hard in 2011, again in 2021, which didn't go so close to the brink, is that, and that's minting, say, $1 trillion coin and depositing it in the Treasury. The Constitution does give the federal government the power to create money by minting coins, which has been interpreted to also printing paper money, greenbacks, debt-free U.S. Reserve notes, as opposed to Federal Reserve notes that the Fed puts out. Those are money that require debt. It requires selling Treasury securities, and then they print those Federal Reserve notes based on the money created by those sales. And that adds to the debt. The greenbacks are debt-free. And actually, the Green Party platform calls for creating money as debt-free greenbacks, which the federal government did to varying degrees at different times from the Civil War until finally in 1971, under the Nixon administration, they stopped issuing any greenbacks because the greenbacks before were backed by the gold standard, and you could redeem the greenbacks with gold. And Nixon took the money system off the gold standard. Now, the Green Party is calling for greenbacks without having them backed by gold. They should just be fiat money. So in any case, the Treasury Secretary could order the production of this $1 trillion coin and deposit it at the Federal Reserve. And that would count as a government asset and give the country the money it needs to pass this debt ceiling. And if the Congress or the Treasury wanted to, once the debt ceiling is raised again, the Treasury could then, destroy the coin and cover it what expenses were made through issuing Treasury securities. Now, that isn't something that could be done, but not even the Democrats are really advocating that. Certainly not the Biden administration, like the Obama administration did. So just to sum up where we're at, we got to resist these Republican attempts to extort cuts to Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and other programs using the debt ceiling as their excuse. Now, this problem will probably be resolved as it has in the past before the U.S. goes into default, which, as I explained, would be a total disaster. But on the other hand, I wouldn't put anything past the crazies in the Republican right wing. They are not concerned with the people's needs, but with their own agenda of, popularity, power, and money. And the rest of us be damned. So that's something to keep an eye on. The other thing I'll just note before we go to questions and comments is there are so many popular freedom struggles going on around the world that we should be in solidarity with. In Iran, Myanmar, Peru, Sudan, Haiti, Palestine, Ukraine, and other countries. And in Russia, it's hard to know how much support it has, but there's an anti-war resistance. And I'm just going to put in the chat a couple of calls for solidarity. One is from the Russian Socialist Movement, It's a call for solidarity actions with anti-war activists in Russia on January 19th. And the left in Russia has been doing this until recently, until this year, when Putin has basically banned all public demonstrations. Well, it actually before this year. And it commemorates the murder of a journalist and an anarchist by fascist gangs that are linked to the Kremlin back in, I think it was 2009. So the left has been using this day, and read the call, and think about maybe trying to send a letter to one of these political prisoners who've been in the anti-war resistance in Russia. You can Google around and find out how to do that, or tweet just a message of solidarity and let people, I think the last slogan in that statement says, to remember is to resist. And these people are isolated within their own country by a police state, and they need their spirits lifted up. And then the other thing is, we went public this week with the Ukraine Solidarity Network, which I've been helping to organize since we started in September. And it's a call to support the Ukrainian resistance to the Russian invasion. And take a look at it. It's a statement you can sign if you want and join the network. So that's the second link that should be in the chat by now. And yes, it is. So let's go to your questions and comments. Scout Trooper 164. Howie, what do you think that the U.S. military is now, or do you think that the U.S. military is now hurt due to their funding for Ukraine? I think what comes around goes around, and it's funny. Now, the military is not hurt by it. It's more spending, and the military budget was increased by about $45 billion more than Biden even asked for when Congress got through with it with the National Defense Authorization Act at the end of last year. So that's additional money to what they're already spending. I mean, our position should be you're spending that money to basically police an empire around the world. We have sent more money to Saudi Arabia since 2015 than is in the pipeline for Ukraine. And that's not counting about 3 times that amount, or about 2.5 times that amount, $127 billion in arms sales to Saudi Arabia that are in the pipeline. And all that should be cut because Saudi Arabia is using that for its military intervention in Yemen, which is another disaster for the people of Yemen. We're sending the biggest recipient of U.S. direct military aid is Israel, which is now, with the right-wing government having come into power, basically saying we're going to annex the whole West Bank and just push the Palestinians out. And lots of Palestinians are dying. Most of their resistance is unarmed. Some of it's rocks, but some of it's just nonviolence or nonviolent resistance. And they're getting killed almost every day as the Israelis take homes from people in East Jerusalem, as well as other areas of the West Bank. And the Palestine National BDS Committee, boycott sanctions or divestment sanctions, their top priority is to cut off military aid. So that's another area where we can cut back on military spending. I haven't seen news about this recently, but there was talk in the UN, and the US was supporting it, to intervene militarily again in Haiti, when the broadest coalition of civil society organizations say, no, that's not what we need. We need humanitarian aid, and we'll take care of the dictator ourselves. The U.S. has been backing that dictator, who, came to power after the assassination of the previous president, is ruling by decree. The parliament doesn't exist, or has, been shut down, and the U.S. is on the wrong side there. So there are, so many things we could do. The aid to Ukraine is about 5% of the military budget. It's not taken away from domestic needs or other military needs, really. There's too much money in the Pentagon budget, and the money we need for our domestic needs, our human needs, and our climate action, uh, we can get that by cutting the military budget, by taxing the rich, and by borrowing. Particularly as we've talked about with the eco-socialist Green New Deal, we've got to make the investments now in a clean, renewable energy system and the other infrastructure that goes along with it, like mass transit and uh, financing people to replace their gas heating with heat pumps and so forth. And, we can't spend that as the money comes in. We got to make those investments now, and they will pay for themselves over time. So, in any case, no, the U.S. military is not hurting for money. That's for sure, and they should be. With the waste, fraud, and abuse there is incredible. They can't do an audit because it's so sprawling and big. It's a mess, and it needs to be reined in. Via email, thoughts on classified documents being found at Biden's home and office. It just, I guess you can say that's what you get for government work. There's no evidence that Biden was hiding these things. As soon as they found them, they contacted the National Archives and the Justice Department, and that those documents are being sent to the National Archives where they belong. On the other hand, who did they hire to go through Biden's stuff and separate his own stuff from stuff that belonged in the National Archives? Obviously, they made some mistakes, and I think that's where it's at right now. It's certainly in contrast to Trump, who, from all indications, took the stuff, hid him, didn't cooperate, then reported they had given all the documents back when they hadn't and knew they hadn't. Trump, I think, is in deep trouble. For Biden, I think it's more a PR problem than a legal problem. Of course, the Republicans are going to, make all the hay they can out of it, but what else is new? Scout Trooper 164, what do you think that the media has finally admitted that Russiagate was fake? The more I hear about those things, the more I tune out the media. Well, I think what you're referring to is that the tweets and the bots that were tweeting, trying to influence the 2016 election, didn't impact the election because they were concentrated on a small cohort of people that already supported Trump. Now, Russiagate is a term used by those that say all claims that Russia tried to influence the election are wrong. But that report itself shows that, yes, the Russians tried to influence people through setting up bots to tweet pro-Trump messages. And so we know that they did. What the reports are saying is that they weren't effective. And that's been my position. Clinton tried to blame the loss of her election on Russian efforts to influence the election. And I've said, whatever influence they had, and it doesn't look like it has that much, she lost that campaign on her own. She ran a terrible campaign. She didn't speak to the people's needs. In fact, she was trying to, link Trump to Russia when people didn't care about that. They wanted to know about healthcare and housing and jobs. And, so she didn't speak to the people's needs. She didn't go to the battleground states in the Midwest that she ended up losing, like Michigan and Wisconsin. Even though her husband, Bill Clinton, was saying, you better go talk to those people, you're losing them. So, I believe Russia did try to influence the elections. That's what secret services do. The US does it, Russia does it. A lot of countries with the capacity do it. They try to influence the politics of other countries. That's to be expected. But it's not an excuse for the Democrats as to why Clinton lost in 2016. They should have overcome. I mean, Trump should have been crushed. I mean, Trump himself, he didn't have to go to Russia and possible links. He was a terrible businessman. He lied all the time. And instead, they went off on this, trying to link Trump to Russia without having concrete information. Just some fears of people in the intelligence agency, and they made that their message. And like I said, the American people, they didn't care about Russia. They were worried about, their own problems. So I don't think the media has admitted that Russian influence operations were fake. I think, there's a lot of confirmation of that. Not all the things that were alleged, and some reporters got ahead of their skis and commentators and made allegations that proved not to be true, but a lot of them did prove to be true. I mean, take the Russian internet agency. Is that what it's called? That Prigozhin, the guy that owns Wagner too, the mercenary outfit that's fighting in Ukraine and a number of places in Africa and Syria and so forth. He came out in the fall. He kind of was saying, he was keeping quiet on that. He was saying he had nothing to do with Wagner. And then in the fall, he decided, I own Wagner, and I'm trying to influence U.S. elections. And he's been indicted. He was indicted by the Comey. No, not Comey. Who was the Marine Corps guy the prosecutor that ran the investigation? I'm blanking on his name. Anyway, Prigozhin was indicted by him for trying, operating in the United States, trying to influence the election. Now that'll never go to trial because Prigozhin, unless he makes a mistake, is never going to be where he can be captured and extradited. In any case, he's admitted that this stuff happened. So Russiagate, if you want to call it that, wasn't fake, but it wasn't that big a deal, that influential either. Frankie Lee, if Biden doesn't run, who are the Dems you think will run for president? And will you run again? You would have my vote. Well, thank you, Frankie. I've got to get a lot of ducks in a row in terms of things I'm already doing, in terms of activism, in terms of my personal life, and then pulling together a campaign, and you got to pull together a team. The last time, the team was there and drafted me. This time, we're going to have to put it back together. So I'm not going to make a decision on that until I see if I can pull together a team and I get this other stuff done. Now, in terms of who I think will run, if Biden doesn't run, I wouldn't be surprised to see Sanders again, Warren again, Buttigieg again, Harris again, all the ones we've seen before, and probably some others. But the problem is the Democratic establishment is not going to let Bernie win. We saw how everybody lined up to stop him in South Carolina, that weekend. And Bernie got beat pretty bad in South Carolina, and then, the South. And, Obama was in on that. He called everybody and said, you got to line up behind Biden because we can't have Bernie win. So, for me, watching the Democratic primaries will be like watching a football game. It's kind of interesting. It's exciting. You don't know who's going to win, who's going to end up ahead, although you have some good ideas. But that's not our politics. We need an alternative that, will stand for Medicare for all without compromise. In fact, a community-controlled national health service. That's all we should be advocating at this point, because national health insurance won't do it when so much of the healthcare system is privatized and profit-mad. Hospitals and all the intermediaries from, pharmacies to funeral homes. And then, the Green New Deal and the climate crisis. We need serious peace policies. The nuclear arms race is still going on. The U.S. is modernizing. I mean, one of the demands, the peace movement should be raising right now is we should get rid of all the land-based ICBMs. They are just targets for other nuclear countries if we get to the point of a nuclear war. They're undermining our security. And because of that, they're on hair trigger alert, which makes them vulnerable to being launched by mistake or misunderstanding. They are a threat to our security. Those ICBMs might as well be aimed right at our own cities. So we should, as Daniel Ellsberg's been arguing for years, and he was a nuclear war planner back in the late 50s. He knows this stuff. We should just get rid of them. That's the kind of, and that would be a peace initiative. We should pledge no first use on nuclear weapons. We should start systematically withdrawing in an orderly fashion from all these military bases around the world, which are not about our security. They're about protecting the assets of US-based global corporations and supporting governments that repress the labor movement and left-wing political opposition. So all those issues still pertain. And then, this time I would also run on building an inclusive multi-party democracy. First of all, we should be, beating up the Democrats for not getting the Voting Rights Act passed, and all those voting access reforms and election protection reforms that they could have passed when they had the majority in both houses if they had gone after the filibuster, made it a public issue, made public pressure on the Senate to do that. And all those Democrats, if they got together, they had the votes. And instead, they didn't. And, voting rights wasn't that big a priority for them. So we got to beat them up on that, but we got to go beyond that. We got to get rid of this exclusive single-member district winner-take-all system where we already know who's going to win the election in almost every case. Over 90% of congressional districts, House districts, and 95% of state legislative districts. And I don't know what the percentage is in city council districts, but it's probably similar. We know who's going to win because one or the other major party has a majority in that district. The elections are a farce. Everybody knows who's going to win. So they're not competitive. And people talk about independent redistricting. California did that. Well, out of 52 House districts, only 5 had a difference of 5% between the winner and loser, competitive difference. So we got to get rid of this farcical system where we have basically one-party districts all over the country, and we know who's going to win before the election happens, and have a competitive system, a proportional representation system, proportional ranked choice voting in multi-member, multi-seat districts. So every party, including the Green Party, gets its fair and proportional share of representation in government. That's the game-changing reform. We got to fight for fair ballot access. Here in New York, it's really a problem. The Democrats passed the most draconian ballot access law in the country. The last gubernatorial election and also the other statewide offices was the first time since 1946 and the only other time since 1891 when they issued government printed ballots that only the Democrat and Republican was on the ballot for the election. So we got to fight for that in a lot of states where it's difficult to get on the ballot. Oklahoma, Indiana, there are a bunch. I'm now a plaintiff in a lawsuit in Indiana, or at least not a plaintiff, but I have a statement that I filed with the lawyers recently in their lawsuit against Indiana. So we got to keep fighting for that. So voting rights, ranked choice voting, including proportional ranked choice voting in legislative elections, or ranked choice national popular vote instead of the electoral college for president, and fair ballot access. These are the things that I would add, as a fourth theme. The first theme is the Green New Deal. The second is an economic bill of rights to take care of the people's needs. The third is peace policies. And the fourth, which I may start with, make it first, is inclusive democracy, including ranked choice voting and proportional representation. So you can see what I would run on if I run, but I'm not there yet. And the Democrats, you can be sure, are not going to run on these things. Bernie had a pretty good Green New Deal. He might bring that back again. His Medicare for all is just insurance, not a health service, which is what we need now. And he's the best of them, and they won't let him win. So we do need an independent left alternative. But even more than that, and we need to be in the presidential race because we can win some ballot lines that way. We can get our ideas out and help build the party, recruit people to the party. All that's good. But where we're really going to build this party is in local elections, for city, county, town offices, and from there, state legislatures in the House as we build a base. House districts, state legislative districts are local elections. They're larger scale than most city elections, but we can run well-organized campaigns that can have a big impact, particularly in these non-competitive districts where the major party that's a minor party in that district often doesn't run a serious campaign, doesn't put money into those campaigns. So we can run serious campaigns and become at least the second party, and certainly define the terms of debate. And getting into the debate is half our battle, because once we're in the debate, our positions are popular. Medicare for all, Green New Deal, and so forth. The people want those things. So there is a path forward to us. And, the presidential race is, it's part of it, but the most important thing is that we need more of us running for these local offices and local districts of state legislature and the House of Representatives. The president, Senate races, those are so expensive and hard. I don't even know why we run them except to, raise some issues. But that should not be a priority over House races or state legislative races or city council, town council races, county council races. Gregory Millard, I would love to work on getting Green Party ballot access here in Georgia. We need to end the duopoly and dump the corruption. Yeah, Georgia is one of the worst states for ballot access. At the moment, I can't remember the details, but I know the petition requirements are high for district races as well as statewide office. They are surmountable, and right now we don't have a Green Party organized in Georgia. So really that's the first step. So we got an organization that could go into ballot access. And if we do have a presidential campaign, the top priority as soon as we get going is going to be working on ballot access. Even if we're competing for the nomination, I would want the campaign to put all the resources it could into helping states get on a ballot. Georgia's tough because you got, close competition statewide for, U.S. Senate and the state offices between the Democrats and Republicans. But in the district races, they're either Democratic majority or Republican majority, and they're not competitive. And that's where I think if the Greens can get on the ballot, that's where we can run people. And at the moment, I don't remember whether if you qualify statewide, then you can run in any district, or whether if you qualify in a district, you are able to run in that district in future elections if you reach a certain vote threshold. I just, don't have the details on that near. But yeah, Georgia has been a big problem for us. I'm not sure we've ever been on a ballot at the presidential level in Georgia. So that's one of the hurdles we have yet to overcome. Amy L. Sachs, Howie, is there a record of how many states have a presidential run to keep a ballot? Is it the majority of states? Yes, it's the majority. I did a count and it was 40. Based on if the presidential candidate gets a certain percentage, or another candidate in that election. Like I think there was a state where it wasn't the presidential vote, it was the Secretary of State vote. But the presidential vote can have coattails and it raised the profile for that Secretary of State vote. So I think the count I came up with in 2000 was 40 of 51 jurisdictions, counting the District of Columbia. So yeah, we can do it in a lot of states. Now, some states are not that hard. New Mexico, it's 0.5 of 1% of the vote. And we were, actually came up just short in New Mexico in 2020 by, like tens of votes. And New Mexico Green Party has since petitioned back onto the ballot. So we're good there. On the other hand, in Alabama, the only way you can get on a ballot is by the presidential vote getting 20% of the vote. And that only happened when, George Wallace was running, American Independent, racist populist party back in the late 60s and early 70s. So, yeah, that's Indiana. Only Secretary of State can qualify. Um, and does that race happen during the presidential race? I think they just had one, which was, in between. It was the midterm period. So maybe they're 2-year terms. I'm not sure, but I know there was, some states where it was, at least one state, maybe more, where it was another office. The percentage of the vote for that office is what got the ballot line. But like I said, the presidential race can help that candidate for that office. George Johnson Hamilton. The oversight that you share with us all each week is fantastic, Howie. Thank you. Truthfully, I think New York State needs you to run a strong state committee and get those House and congressional seats. The recall of Santos definitely opens the door if New York can present a green of good quality. Well, I do know the Greens on Long Island in that district are trying to get ready if there is a special election. There's a short time to do a petition, and it's difficult as an independent, but I think they have that aspiration. And needs me to run a strong state committee and get those House and congressional. Well, the state committee is, 60 or 70 people. And I sometimes win votes for my position and sometimes don't on the state committee. But I have advocated that we need to run House, congressional, and state legislative seats. In fact, now New York has a public financing system. Up to $250 is matched. The first $50, I think, is matched 12-1. The next $100 is matched 8-1, and the last $100 of that $250 that qualifies is matched 6-1. So you can raise a hell of a lot of money. Now, those contributions have to be in district, so you really have to, be strong in your district. But with that money, we can run really strong campaigns. Now, I've been critical of matching fund systems because they increase the disparity between established candidates with a base and the ability to raise those in-district donations and upstarts like Greens or Independents. Because, take the 6-1 match, if it's $50, that would be $350 for the small candidate. And then another candidate has $500, that would be $3,500. So the difference goes between $450, 50 to 500, to what? 350 between and 3,500, which is almost $3,000. So, it increases the disparity 6 times. That's a problem as opposed to the equal grants. What do we call it? We called it I forget what we called it. It was back in the 90s. It's a system that's been adopted by Arizona, Connecticut, and Maine for their state legislative elections. But it's an equal grant. And so everybody's on the same playing field once they qualify, and they have the same amount of money to run their campaigns. That's a better system. But on the other hand, in New York, the system we got, we can take advantage of. And, the spending has diminishing returns. Yeah, you can buy more TV advertising, but in these districts, the media markets don't always hit the district or cover it. You got to go to 2 media markets to cover some districts. And other, like in New York City, you buy citywide media, very expensive, or city media, and it hits the whole city, and people don't even know what districts they're in. So it's not very effective. On the other hand, the money we can raise can be used for a ground operation, door knocking, talking to the voters, introducing them to the candidate, especially if the candidate can get out there a lot and knock on those doors. That kind of campaign will be strong. We can hire, a campaign manager, a good treasurer, so you don't get into financial troubles, and people to do the street work. So we have an opportunity here in New York, and it varies from state to state. So Yeah, I'm with you, George. We need to, really emphasize running those local elections in New York State, and I think we got the state legislative elections in particular because of that money. And then again, town and city races where we have one candidates, we have some mayors of villages and members of town councils, and school district school boards. So we need to expand upon that. That's the way we're going to build a party. Stupid vegan, who's not stupid. I remember comments in a previous chat. I think we also need to get some of the millions of non-voters motivated to get some changes in place, like ranked choices. And I think a lot would want it. And I think a lot would vote green. I agree with you. I've often said that based on talking to a lot of people over the years on the doorsteps, co-workers, various community meetings, a lot of the people that don't vote are not apathetic, they're alienated. Um, I'm thinking of one worker, Teamster, that I worked with in particular, who, he didn't want to register to vote. He didn't want the man to know any more about him, and he didn't think it would make any difference. But when something was in the news and going on in the world, when I got to work, he'd get to me as soon as he could and ask me what I thought about it because he was thinking about it. So he was not apathetic, he was alienated. And there are just lots of people like that. So the other thing is a lot of people don't vote because, like I said, we know who's going to win these elections before they happen because they're one party districts with the single member district winner take all system. With ranked choice, your vote counts. Um, and you can vote for who you want without worrying about helping your worst enemy. So, yeah, that would bring more people out. We have good evidence on that it does increase voter turnout. So, and yeah, people would vote green. We know from public opinion polls that our positions on things like eco-socialist Green New Deal and Medicare for all and taxing the rich and student debt relief, raising the minimum wage, we can go on, have not just majority support, super majority support. And the Democrats sometimes give those things lip service, but they never follow through. For example, here in New York, a majority in both the House and the Senate, where they have Democratic supermajorities, are signed on as co-sponsors to a single-payer health care bill. But they never get it out of committee because the leadership doesn't want it because the Democrats are getting lots of money from the health insurance industry. So it's performative. It's not real. Whereas the Greens are real. And, I think, we have a real case to be made that you want to get, say, in New York, single payer healthcare, you got to get some Greens in there to force the issue because the Democrats are just giving us lip service. Scout Trooper 164, what do you think of Uber drivers and nurses going on strike? Well, I'm glad to see workers using the strike weapon. Um, and I'm not up on exactly what happened in New York City, but I think they won their key demands about staffing as well as their wage and benefits demands. Um, and Uber drivers, yeah, and more power to the Uber drivers organizing because that job tends to attract people that are, uh, they want to, set their own hours and just work for themselves, and they're hard to get into collective action and bargaining. So, I'm impressed that in some places the Uber drivers have got together and are trying to bargain with the company. Scout Trooper 164, Howie, what do you think of Biden pushing Trump's border policy even more, as well as the cartel violence expanding in Mexico? I feel Biden is being a hypocrite, no surprise, and the cartels are awful. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And Title 42, which enabled the U.S. to expel, deport people seeking asylum or just immigration to the United States summarily without due process, or the immigration process because of COVID is going to be tested, I think, now in the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court may throw it out. But we know there's reporting the Biden administration is figuring out how to do the same policy, the same effect, the same deportations without having Title 42 backing them. So the humanitarian crisis at the border is not being addressed in a humanitarian manner by the Biden administration. And, the cartel violence, there's a case where decriminalizing hard drugs and legalizing marijuana would undermine the cartels because they make their money in the prices because it's an underground economy. If it comes above ground, because possession is decriminalized for the hard drugs and marijuana is legal, the cartels have less of a role to play. Organized crime would have less of a role to play. I mean, we would still go after, organized crime, importing things like fentanyl and so forth. But the users, we would treat their issue as a health problem, not a criminal problem, and bring that market above ground so that the small dealers and the users, are not hiding in the shadows, where the users who may be dealing with addiction issues can't get help, and the small dealers. We should have a full employment policy, higher wages, so that people don't have to, look to that, way of trying to make some money. And the small dealers don't make a lot of money. They make a little money, and it's dangerous. So there are better options. So that, I think, is one way to undermine the cartel violence, which is a huge problem in Mexico. And the war on drugs and the military response to it has just it's like an arms race. The cartel is armed in response, and so there's a lot of shooting and killing and violence that we shouldn't have. Via email, comments on the protests in Brazil. These people are copycatting the January 6th people here. Bolsonaro hasn't denounced them. He's called the election fake. I mean, it's out of the Trump and the right-wing playbook in this country. What I think is going to be different is that the prosecution of these people that basically are attempting a coup, or what the protesters really want is the military to take over. They're going to end up being prosecuted a lot faster than our insurrectionists, our cousters in this country have been, especially those at the top. And Bolsonaro's on the run. He's trying to get, I heard on a news report, maybe BBC's trying to get citizenship in Italy, which doesn't have an extradition treaty with Brazil. So I think that's a big difference. They're, the Lula regime or government is going to, and the Brazilian government is going to move fast against these people that were demanding a military coup, much faster than particularly the tops who, the planners, Trump and his circle, as opposed to the people, who went into the Capitol on January 6th. Yeah, they're being prosecuted, but, it's the big fat cats that we want, the big fish. And I don't want to see it like, what happened after the 2008 financial scandals, fraud, and stealing people's homes, where, none of those banksters went to jail. Maybe one of them was prosecuted. And a lot of people's homes were taken. And now, the biggest landlords in the country are Wall Street firms that have been who bought a lot of homes when they were cheap back, right after the Great Recession, and are still doing it. I mean, I get calls all the time from people want me to sell my home to them for cash. And I know those people are fronting for somebody on Wall Street. These aren't local business people. Or else, they tell me who they are, where they live, how they know me. These are, people calling, they're looking up who owns homes and, trying to see who might be in a financial mine and will sell for cheap. So the banksters got off, and I hope the big fish in the coup they attempted here do not get off. But we'll see. On the other hand, in Brazil, I think they're going to move with speed to go after the big guys as well as the little guys. Greggy Mallard. Howie, what's your opinion of having Greens run as independent candidates in state where the Green Party doesn't have ballot access? Yeah, if that's only way you can get on the ballot, yeah. You have a capital I. I don't know if that means with a party called independent, like in Oregon, which wouldn't be relevant here because there is a Pacific Green Party with a ballot line, as well as a Progressive Party with a ballot line. The independent party there is not so much on the left, but they will run candidates from the Greens and or the Pacific or the Progressive Party. But in general, yeah, if you can't get on as a Green, run as an independent. Tell everybody you're in the Green Party and why we should have ballot access as part of your campaign. Scout Trooper 164. Oh no, Frankie Lee. Howie, do you think the Twitter files will do anything to keep government out of social media? I haven't read them closely. I think you're referring to Matt Taibbi's Twitter files, which I'm first of all skeptical of because Elon Musk, let him have access to the records. So in a way, he's already kind of compromised in terms of his independence. And what I understand, and I haven't followed this closely, is the Biden campaign asked Twitter, I think not let some tweets go through that affected his campaign. And it may have had to do with his son, Hunter. Now, the campaign's a private organization. It's not the government. Biden is now, the president. I haven't seen any allegations that they've been using, telling the government to, not let certain things go through on Twitter. And I know vaguely that, the FBI and maybe other government agencies also tried to influence Twitter. And that's wrong. They should stay out of that. So those are my thoughts on that. I'm sort of waiting for somebody to write up a good summary of what's going on rather than following it in detail. It's just so much going on. Scout Trooper 164. Why does the GOP want to slash IRS funding? Are they just that hypocritical? No, I think they're consistent. They don't want, particularly their rich donors, paying taxes. And the IRS doesn't have the staff to audit the rich. I mean, we saw this with Trump. I mean, there's a law or regulation that presidential tax returns are supposed to be audited. And the IRS didn't do it for 2 years. The other years, they just did a superficial job. They only had one staff person and later 3 looking over these very long, complicated submissions. And that's indicative of the fact they don't have enough staff to go after particularly the rich folks that are cheating on their tax returns. And, they estimate, I forget the number, but it's over $100 billion a year, I think, that could be collected if these people paid their taxes. So, yeah, the Republicans don't want the IRS to be able to do its job so people can get away with cheating on their taxes, the rich folks that fund the Republican Party. I think that's what it's about. It's not hypocritical, it's consistent. The GOP, well, yeah, there's hypocrisy. Some of them say we're now the working class party. Yeah, right. They're really, rich folks party, as are the Democrats. The Democrats just do a better job of branding what they're talking about as being for the people. But in the end, it's the corporate Democrats that call the shots. That's why we still haven't got, for example, the minimum wage raised. I mean, there's another case where, to hell with the filibuster, the federal minimum wage is now $7.25. Yeah, that's starvation wage. Scott Trooper 164. What can we do to destroy big money? It's ruining our lives, including the open internet, and I'm tired of it. Well, big money, I think you're referring to either one or two things: big money in campaigns, or big money being, Wall Street big banks. And both of them are contributing to ruining our lives. I'm not sure how the open internet refers to that or is linked to that. But let me say about big money. I mean, the amount of money spent on this last midterm was double what was spent on the 2018 midterm. It's just got insane. And so, politics is really a game for politicians willing to sell themselves out to the super rich. And so we get politicians, legislators who answer to the super rich. And that's why we can't deal with basic problems in this country. Failing infrastructure, a healthcare system that, can't take care of many people, and so forth. So, what we really need is this We the People Amendment, which would say that in the Constitution, that money is property, not speech. The Supreme Court has said money is speech and allowing big money. And what's the other part of that amendment? Money is property, not speech. Oh, and that corporations are, artificial, not shouldn't be regarded as persons with constitutional rights or artificial persons with constitutional rights. That change would enable us to regulate corporations and the electoral system, the finances in the electoral system. Most countries in Europe, not all of them, but most of them have some regulation, much stronger regulation than we do in terms of big money flooding into those elections. So, we need that constitutional amendment so we can get past the Buckley v. Vallejo decision from 1976, which said, money is speech, not just property, and made it very difficult to regulate campaign finances. And there have been further decisions, Citizens United in around 2010 is another one that had a big influence. And recent Supreme Court decision knocked out the law from 1908 that won't let corporations directly contribute to political campaigns. I mean, we're just, our elections are up for sale. It's ridiculous. And then the big banks, I mean, they are such socially important institutions. They should be socially owned and regulated and operated in the public interest, not for the private profit of their shareholders. That would enable us to, direct investment to where it's needed. And instead of, big funds that own rental housing all over the country and only operate that housing in the interest of squeezing as much rent out as they can, we can invest it in, say, public housing so that we have housing offered at cost, run on a nonprofit basis. People pay rents scaled to their ability to pay, so that cross endorses mixed income, desegregated public housing. So where you have a mix of people from middle class, upper middle class, working class, poor. That's what they do in Europe. Here, public housing has been used to segregate, but we could do it differently. And we need a lot of new housing. If we had a big sector of public housing, it's less than 1% of all housing in the country now. In European countries, it's in the double digits. In Vienna, almost 2/3 of the housing is socially owned in one form or another. And that means the private rental sector has to compete with that public sector, and that brings the rents down in the private sector as well. So that's just an example of if we had public banks, we could direct the investments to where they're needed and serve the public rather than the interests of the very rich, the upper 10%, particularly upper 1%, and particularly the 1/10 of 1% that has such disproportionate ownership of our economy. Vicky Corden, what can be done for such high prices on food and miscellaneous necessities? Even if wages increase, the average person cannot improve financial situation. That's true. Wages are not increasing as fast as inflation. And the reason we have inflation is not because wages are increasing, they're declining in real terms. In other words, what they're worth next to the rising or the declining value of the dollar. And that's a supply side issue coming out of the COVID crisis and somewhat out of the war in Ukraine. There's we have shortage of things, and so that means instead of raising interest rates, which slows down production, we should be investing in production of those things which are in short supply and the prices are high. And also, investing in the case of gasoline, switching off dependence and gas, fossil gas, switching off them to renewables, particularly solar and wind. So you don't have to keep repurchasing fuel all the time. Once you got that wind and solar infrastructure, that energy is free. It's coming from the sun, directly with solar, indirectly with wind. And there's been a lot of talk about fusion power. The sun is our fusion power plant, and it's time we started using it. So there's, what we can do is increase production and those things that are in short supply that has caused an increase in prices, and then also, raise wages for working people, not just the minimum wage, but wages increases we can win through collective bargaining and striking if we need to. Via email. Whoop, I think I already commented on Brazil. Okay, so our hour is up. I thank you for being here. I hope the discussion was helpful. I'll refer back to those two links I put up at the beginning. One about January 19th being a day of solidarity with Russian anti-war resistors. I hope you will look at that call from the Russian Socialist Movement. There it is in the chat. And consider what you might do on that day, whether it's just, tweeting or Facebooking about how you're thinking about those folks, or directly trying to get a communication to those people in prison, waiting trial, or already convicted, or to their families. And the other one is about the Ukraine Solidarity Network, which we announced this week. Take a look at that call. You can sign it and join the network. I hope you will. It's a national liberation struggle we should be supporting. We're not on the side of U.S. imperialism or Russian imperialism, but the people of Ukraine fighting for their national liberation. And I think that's what our politics should be. We want to build this green socialism from below by the working class and the oppressed. We can't rely on capitalist states, whether it's Russia, the U.S., or any other state in the world. We got to be with the people. So with that, have a good week, and we'll see you next week.